The silence of the night was torn by the sound of rustling paper. Only the flickering light of a tallow candle illuminated the ledger books scattered on the storeroom floor. Amos's hands were smudged with ink up to his elbows, a testament to hours of work. But his eyes, usually lost in columns of figures, were now fixed on a single page that had upended his world. Horse, Tim. Age, 13. Sold, Mr. James Hayden, Charleston. Sum, $725. It was his brother. Just 3 lines. In a column marked, Disposition. Tim's entire being, his laugh, the way he'd placed a hand on Amos's head, reduced to a valuation. And more sickeningly, the column heading under which this entry fell read, Yield depleted. The master, Mr. Talbot, had sold Tim because he'd fallen ill, a racking cough that had left him frail. He was no longer productive. Amos raised a hand, the quill trembling between his ink-stained fingers. His heart hammered against a single thought: tear this page out. Erase this lie, this indifference. But the hand stopped. For 2 years now, he had lived in this storeroom, kept here by the master who had seen his neat script and facility with numbers, made his assistant. These ledgers were what had spared him from field labor, from the lash, for Mr. Talbot needed a keeper of accurate books. But these same ledgers were the record of his own family's destruction. In a drawer was a larger volume, labeled simply, Negroes. Amos opened it. Here were the records of births, deaths, purchases, sales, even the allotment of meal and cloth. Another page. Sarah, female, picker, B. 1844. Child, Amos, male, B. 1847. On the same page, a red line was drawn through an entry, and in the margin, Jacob, male, carpenter, sold to Mr. Samuels, 1850. $900. His father. Amos had been 3. He had only a vague memory, being lifted onto a broad shoulder, a deep, soft voice saying something he could no longer recall. Then, gone. And his mother, Sarah, had never spoken of it. Shed no tears, voiced no lament. Only a depth had settled in her eyes, like a well that had been capped. Amos closed the book. Outside, the plantation was quiet, only the crickets sounding. He blew out the candle. In the dark, his resolve hardened. These ledgers, these seemingly innocent columns and numbers, were instruments of power. They turned lives into currency. But what if the numbers themselves were turned? What if these very books, the record of Mr. Talbot's wealth, became the cause of his ruin? This would be no rebellion of raised fists. No fire, no broken chains. It would be a different kind of war. One fought in ink and paper. And Amos, the slave they called, the accountant, had the weapons. Amos was born in a nameless cabin, one in a row of cabins near the cotton fields. The floor was dirt, the walls daub and wattle. His mother, Sarah, had felt the pains come on in the night, after a long day of labor. There was no doctor, only 2 old women who midwifed the slaves' births. By the light of a smoky lamp, they delivered the child. "It's a boy," one woman muttered, wrapping him in a torn blanket. Sarah held the child to her chest. Her face was drawn with exhaustion, but her eyes held a strange light. She thought, "I will give him a name that means strength." But she knew the master's wife, Mrs. Talbot, liked to name newborn slaves from the Bible. And besides, what was a name? Just a label. One she could change in the quiet of her own heart. Come morning, the overseer, Mr. Riggs, came. He looked at the child with a cursory glance, pulled a small notebook and made an entry. Sarah's new child. Boy? He would report to Mr. Talbot, who would enter it in his larger book. And later, weeks later, when Mrs. Talbot was taking her walk under the cherry trees, she would suggest the name. Amos? No. Amos. A prophet's name in the Bible. And so Amos came to be. His earliest years were lost in the haze of the cabin. His mother, Sarah, left for the fields before dawn, leaving Amos with an old woman, Bessie, who minded the young children while their parents worked. Bessie's lap was warm, and her stories were full of haints and river spirits. But it was numbers that fascinated Amos. He would count pebbles, lined them up in rows. When Bessie handed out bits of bread, he noted how many each child received. One day, when he was perhaps 4, he saw something extraordinary. His older brother, Tim, who was 9, was making marks in the dirt with a stick. He was trying to form letters, ones he'd seen on paper in the overseer's hand. "What's that?" Amos asked. Tim looked around, then whispered, "It's my name. T. I gotta remember it." "Why?" "Because if all we are is a name," Tim said, his eyes holding a seriousness beyond his years, "then we ought to at least know the name they gave us." Tim showed Amos how to make an in the dirt. It was a secret, a tiny rebellion. But the secret did not last. One day, Overseer Riggs saw Tim making the marks. He walked over quietly, raised his whip, and brought it down on Tim's hand with a crack that split the skin. "Niggers don't need to read nor write," Riggs said, without any particular anger, as if stating a mundane fact. "I see you at it again, I'll whip your mammy, too." Tim didn't cry. He just clamped his injured hand with the other and looked at Amos, whose eyes were wide with terror. That look held a warning, remember. Knowledge is dangerous here. When Amos was 3, the first great fracture in his world occurred. It was high summer. The cotton was boiling white, and the air swam with lint. A stranger, wearing a slouch hat and riding a fine horse, arrived at Mr. Talbot's house. He was a slave trader. The news traveled through the cabins like a chill wind: "Master needs money. He's selling some off." Dread settled in every family. Who would go? It was a calculation based on labor, age, health. At night, Amos heard his parents whispering. "Jacob, you strong, you a carpenter," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "You valuable. Maybe they pass you by." "No," came Jacob's deep voice. "I hear he wants men for hard field work downriver. My building skills useless there." He left the sentence unfinished. In the dark, Amos felt the warmth of his father's chest. The next morning, Overseer Riggs called Jacob's name. 2 other men's names followed. There was no scene. No wailing. The enslaved new displays of emotion only brought more trouble. Jacob picked up his son, sat him on his shoulder. Amos touched his father's hair with his small hands. It was thick and curled tight. "My son," Jacob said, his voice oddly calm. "Mind your mammy. Be still. Keep watching." Then he handed Amos to Sarah, their hands touching for a moment, and he turned and walked behind the trader. Amos watched him go, his back straight, his steps firm. He did not cry. But he felt a hollowing, as if a piece of his own insides had been carved out and was now walking away, perhaps never to return. After that day, Sarah never spoke of it. She rose before dawn, left Amos with Bessie, and went to the fields. In the evening she returned, weary, held her son, but her eyes were elsewhere. Amos learned that stillness, invisibility, making oneself small, was safety. Amos was 11 when the second turn in his life came. He was given small tasks, fetching water, carrying broken tools for mending, helping with the horses. He was observant, quiet. It was this very quietness that drew Mr. Talbot's notice. Mr. Elijah Talbot was a tall, spare man nearing 50. His hair was going grey, and he wore a clean suit always, no matter the heat. He would ride his horse around the plantation, inspecting everything with a cold eye. His eyes were grey and unfeeling, like slate. He did not shout. He gave orders, and his voice held a finality that brooked no question. One day, he saw Amos fixing a broken basket weave, making it serviceable again. "What's your name?" Talbot asked. "Amos, master." "Your mammy is Sarah?" "Yes, master." Talbot considered. "Report to the storeroom tomorrow morning. Mr. Harris will be there." Mr. Harris was Talbot's elderly clerk, now growing frail and dim-sighted. The storeroom was a large, brick-built space for storing crops, but one corner was fitted as an office, a large desk, shelves of ledger books, ink pots. Harris was a sour man with trembling hands. "Master thinks you got some sense," he grumbled. "We'll see." He set Amos to calculating the cost of a bale of cotton, if the expense per pound was such, and the yield such. Amos figured silently, counting on his fingers, then gave the answer. Harris checked his book. It was correct. So it went, for weeks. Harris taught him addition, subtraction, multiplication. He showed him how to make entries, date, item, quantity, price. Amos learned with a swiftness that was almost frightening. This was numbers. This was logic. It was a world he understood, where things had order, cause had effect. One day, Harris fell ill, and Amos was told to prepare the weekly report for the master. Talbot looked over his work, its neatness, its accuracy. "You will stay here," Talbot said in his flat voice. "Harris is retiring. You will keep my books. But remember." He stepped closer, his cold eyes pinning Amos. "These are just numbers. You cannot make an error in them. If you do, or if you speak of what is here to anyone, you will be sent to the cotton fields. And your mother with you. Do you understand?" Amos understood. It was an opportunity, but one fraught with peril. He only nodded. "Yes, master." And so Amos, at 12, became the accountant. The other enslaved people looked at him with envy and suspicion. He was near the master. He slept in the storeroom, which was cool even in heat. He was given clean clothes. But he knew it was all a facade. He was still property. He just wore a different kind of chain, a chain of paper. Sitting in the storeroom, Amos saw the inner workings of the plantation. It was not just fields, it was a machine where every cog was a human being. He read the books that tracked each slave's productivity. Sarah, average 180 pounds cotton per day. Minimum quota, 200 pounds. If one fell short, a mark was placed by their name. 3 marks, and punishment followed, either the lash or reduced rations. Another book tracked fines. Black Ellen, broken plow. Fine, $2, deducted from wages. The enslaved earned no wages, but it was a fictional account, to show they were in debt to Mr. Talbot. A system from which one could never work oneself free. Overseer Riggs's cruelty was methodical, not passionate. He used his whip by calculation. 10 lashes for a minor infraction. 50 for a more serious one. He never struck in rage. He was performing a task. His face held no expression. One day, Amos heard the sounds of punishment outside, Riggs whipping a young boy who had rested from exhaustion. The crack of the lash carried to the storeroom. Amos's quill stopped. He clenched his fingers into a fist so tight his nails bit into his palm. He thought of the old scars on his mother's back, ridges beneath her dress. Then the door opened, and Talbot entered. He gestured outside. "Record it. Joseph, idleness. Fine, $2. Corporal correction." Amos looked up into Riggs's eyes. The man was smiling, a thin, humorless smile. Amos did his work. But that night, back in the cabin, he watched his mother rubbing her feet by the fire. They were swollen, toes bent. "Mammy," he said, a new kind of boldness in his voice. "I read the books. I know they expect you to pick 200 pounds a day." Sarah looked at her son, surprise then fear in her eyes. "Amos, you mustn't speak on that." "Don't. But if you pick 180, they mark you. 3 marks, and punishment." "We know, son. We all know." Her voice held a profound weariness. "You must be still. Do your work. That is our way." But Amos could not be still. Not anymore. The numbers were singing in his head. He could see the flaws in the system. Talbot was miscalculating the price of cotton. The supply accounts were off. He was overpaying for things. It was all there in the record. And if the record were wrong, Amos began his secret work. He sewed small pockets of sacking, hidden inside his shirt. There he kept his own small book, made from scraps of saved paper. In this book, he began to keep a record of his own. It was not a copy. it was a different story. Official ledger, tobacco, £500 cotton, received. Amos's ledger, tobacco, £530 cotton, received. Riggs hid £30, likely sold. Official ledger, new shoes for Charles, $1. Amos's ledger, shoes for Charles, entered months ago. Why again? What happened to first pair? He watched everything. Crop yields. Payments to suppliers. Slave sales. He began to record every discrepancy, every theft. Riggs shorted supplies, pocketing the difference. The master's son, young Master William, charged toys to slaves' accounts, entered as tools. But the most painful pages were the sales records. He created a new column, family. He noted, next to each slave sold, the names of their children, partner, or parents, if they were on the plantation. It was a map written in blood, a family tree perpetually being pruned. Amos shared this secret with only one person, his mother. One night, he showed her the little book. Sarah could not read, but she understood numbers. She looked at her son, and for the first time in years, her eyes filled with tears. Not of sorrow. Of pride. "You are doing a dangerous thing, my son," she whispered. "It's only paper, Mammy." "No. It is truth. And truth is always dangerous." Part 7, Fire and Reckoning, 1859. The autumn of 1859 came. Attention hung over the plantation. Strange news came in the papers. A man named John Brown had raided an armory somewhere up north. Fear was spreading among slaveholders. Talbot grew stricter. He ordered Riggs to increase surveillance. And then, the fire. It started in a small shed near the storeroom. Likely an accident, a knocked-over lantern. But Talbot suspected arson. He ordered the culprit found. No one confessed. So, Talbot decided to make an example. He selected an elderly slave, Elder Ben, who oversaw the plantation's gardening. Ben was suspected of stealing gardening tools. The punishment was to be a whipping. 50 lashes. Amos was called from the storeroom to witness. All the enslaved were assembled. Ben was tied to a post. Riggs prepared his whip. Amos found his mother in the crowd. Her face was like stone. The first lash fell. A red line bloomed on Ben's back. He did not cry out. He only grunted. Amos closed his eyes. But the sounds filled his ears. The crack. The intake of breath. His heart hammered. He thought of numbers. 50. Each one. 25. Halfway. Then, another sound. A whimper. It was his mother. She had put her hand to her mouth, but the sound escaped. Riggs stopped. He looked at Sarah, then at Talbot. Talbot nodded. That woman as well. 10 lashes. For insolence. Amos's breath caught. The ground seemed to fall away beneath him. 2 men dragged Sarah forward. She made no more sound. She looked at her son, and in that look said, "No. Do nothing." As the lash fell on her back, Amos bit his own tongue so hard he tasted blood. He clenched his fists, imagining them around Riggs's throat. But he did nothing. He only stood, until it was over. That night, in the cabin, he dressed his mother's wounds. The marks were fresh, red and split. Sarah did not weep. "Now you see," she said, her voice thick with pain. "This is our life. We can do nothing." Amos gave no answer. But inside, something had broken. The patience he had built so carefully had shattered. Only one emotion remained, vengeance. But it would not be the vengeance he imagined. He would set no fire. He would kill no one. He would use the very ledgers, the records of cruelty, and turn them into a weapon of ruin. Amos's plan formed slowly. It was dangerous, near impossible. But he saw no other path. He had sensed that Mr. Talbot was financially strained. Cotton prices were falling. He had taken loans. He was trying to secure more money from the bank. And banks required records to be shown. Amos's idea: he would create 2 sets. One set, which he would show Talbot, would appear correct but contain small, deliberate errors that made the plantation seem profitable. The second set, in his secret ledger, would be accurate, showing every theft, every loss, every frivolous expense. But the real plan went deeper. What if the bank suspected the records were false? What if they sent an independent auditor? Then Talbot would have only 2 choices: blame Amos, a slave whose word was worthless, or be exposed himself. It was a gambit. If Talbot discovered it, Amos's death was certain. One night, he spoke to his mother. "Mammy, I have to do something. But it is dangerous." Sarah looked at him for a long time. "Your father said, keep watching. You have watched. Now it is time to do what you think right. You could be in danger, too." "We have always been in danger, son." Amos outlined his plan. Sarah listened. Then she offered a suggestion. "You need an ally. Someone who knows the outside." "Who?" "Tobias." Tobias was an old slave who had once worked on the docks. He knew ships, traders, the world beyond. He was shrewd, and he hated Mr. Talbot for selling his daughter years before. Amos met with Tobias, speaking cautiously. The old man studied him. "You want to sink the ship," he said. "But you are on it." "I know." Tobias nodded. "I will help. I know a man, in Charleston. A clerk for a lawyer. If you can get your true book to him, perhaps he can use it." It was a slim hope. But it was something. The spring of 1860 arrived. Talbot was desperate. The bank had refused to extend his loans without seeing recent records. He ordered Amos to prepare a detailed report, a profit and loss statement for the last 3 years. Amos began the work. Day and night, he stayed in the storeroom, ostensibly preparing the correct books. But in his secret ledger, he was compiling the final, damning calculations. He found the plantation was operating at a profound loss. Riggs's thefts, the waste, mismanagement. The master's son spent heavily on his hobbies. The slaves, demoralized, produced less. Amos prepared his report. The official one showed a modest profit. The secret one showed catastrophic loss. And then, he took the step that changed everything. He planted a single, glaring error in the official report. An error only a skilled accountant would spot. He moved a large quantity of cotton from one year's yield to another, inflating the current year's profit but making the next year's numbers impossible. It was a mistake that would raise a bank auditor's suspicion. Tobias made contact. His man from Charleston was willing to come, posing as a trader, to receive the secret book. A day was set. But someone betrayed them. Perhaps another slave, jealous of Amos, grew suspicious. Perhaps someone saw Tobias acting strangely. One morning, as Amos was making final preparations in the storeroom, the door burst open. Mr. Talbot entered, followed by Riggs and 2 other men. Talbot's face was pale, his eyes burning with an icy fury. "You are to be searched," he said. Amos's heart stopped. The secret book was inside his shirt. Riggs grabbed him, tore at his clothes. The book fell out. Talbot picked it up, flipped the pages. His face flushed, then darkened. He saw the page detailing his son's extravagance. Another showing Riggs's thefts. And then the pages with the family names beside the sales. For a moment, the storeroom was silent. Then Talbot said softly, "You know the penalty for this." Amos said nothing. He only looked into the master's eyes. "Death," Talbot said. "Death for insurrection." But then, he changed his mind. Perhaps he realized that killing Amos would raise questions about the records. The bank might grow suspicious. He mastered his breath. "No. You do not deserve so clean an end. You will be returned to the cotton fields. And your mother with you." you will both do the work of the weakest. And every day, you will be whipped, to remind you of what you are. It was a death in life. Amos and his mother were sent to the fields. They picked cotton. Every morning, Amos received his 10 lashes. His back became a ruin of scar upon fresh wound. Sarah was punished too, for her slowness. But Amos did not break. He knew that his secret book, though seized, had a copy. He had recreated the crucial pages from memory and hidden them beneath a stone in the storeroom floor. And then, fate took a strange turn. Talbot, under pressure from his creditors, decided to present his improved records to the bank. He called for an independent auditor from Richmond. The auditor came, examined the books. And he found the error. The very error Amos had planted. The auditor dug deeper. He found other discrepancies. He grew suspicious. He made further inquiries. And by chance, he learned of Tobias, who was still allowed to work on the docks. Tobias, bitter over Amos's fate, spoke to the auditor. He told of the secret book that had been seized. The auditor pressed Talbot. He demanded to see all records. Talbot, in a panic, summoned Amos back to the storeroom, hoping he would fix everything. But Amos, now weakened by pain and fever, refused. "I cannot, master. My mind, the lash has addled it." Talbot flew into a rage. He began to beat Amos, but the auditor stopped him. He said if the books were not in order, the bank would call in the loans. And then, one night, Tobias did what Amos had never imagined. He set a fire. A real fire. Perhaps he meant only to create a distraction, but the wind was high. The storeroom, filled with paper and wood, became a furnace. The fire consumed the storeroom and all the records within, both official and secret. The bank had no proof left. They called in the loans. Talbot was ruined. He was forced to sell the plantation. The slaves were auctioned off, families scattered. An empire built on a paper foundation turned to ash. Amos and his mother were bought by a smaller farmer, a man less severe. There, Amos lived out the rest of his years as a field hand. He never married. He spoke little. But he knew he had done his work. He had turned the record of cruelty into the instrument of its downfall. He had defeated his master with his own weapon, accountancy. Years later, when freedom came, Amos was an old man. He lived in a small settlement where he wrote letters for people, being one of the few who could read and write. One day, a young man, a historian of sorts, came to him. The young man had heard rumors of a slave called the accountant, said to have brought down a plantation. Amos told him his story. Slowly, painfully. He showed him the place where the storeroom had stood, now just a mound of bricks. "But your record," the historian said. "It all burned." Amos smiled a thin smile. "Not all." And from memory, he recited the crucial figures. The names from the sales. The family names. The sums. The historian stared in wonder. "You remember it all?" "Every number," Amos said, an old light in his eyes. "Because they were never just numbers. They were people. My father. My brother. My mother. And as long as I live, they will not be just numbers. They will be remembered." And so the man whose existence had been a line in a ledger, in his final days, turned all those lines back into a story. A story of cruelty, resolve, and a strange, paper-thin justice. The slave they called the accountant died. But his story, kept in the ledgers of his mind, lived on. A reminder that sometimes, the most powerful weapon is not the one made of steel, but the one made of truth, kept safe in a mind that remained free, even in bondage.